A lot in the world has changed in the 75 months between the release of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. Based on my calculations, assuming that you play the game for 100 hours, that means that we had to wait 9 minutes for each second of Zelda goodness. Was it worth it? Absolutely. This is not going to be a 3-hour review as some people have done with Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, but instead just a quick jotting of my thoughts. After all, it is nice to be concise. Metacritic has Breath of the Wild's average rating at 96, and Tears of the Kingdom at 95. I do not really look to critics as they often deviate from my peculiar taste, but for these two games, my opinion just about matches these numbers. That is to say, Breath of the Wild is ever so slightly better than Tears of the Kingdom, but when you are trying to make a direct sequel to the best game of the last decade, just barely missing the bar is still phenomenal in its own right. Instead of gushing like a lunatic, I think it would be better to steer in the direction of highlighting things that put a slight dent in the experience. After all, you can read or watch hundreds of reviews about just how amazing the game truly is, so why not break the mold and be a little bit negative? Like with Wild, Kingdom gives you a set of problems and gives you the freedom to decide how you are going to go about solving them. At the same time, however, where Wild often had 5 or more solutions for any given puzzle, oftentimes Kingdom is designed with obstacles specifically to stop a player from doing X or Y, making it so that there are 3 solutions to every problem instead. The autonomy that made me love Breath of the Wild is still there, but not to the same extent. Perhaps the best example of this is the use of Zonai equipment. Created a flying machine to get to a floating island? It's going to die out on you within a minute of flying, even if you have the energy for it. There are many such instances of the game just straight up saying nope. Another slight gripe that I have with the game is that, while Wild took pride in breaking as many Zelda conventions as could be reasonably done, Tears of the Kingdom plays it safer by building off of what Breath of the Wild did. While there is something to be said about consistency, and the game does have some changes to differentiate it from its predecessor, it still feels like they played it too safe. This game would have been an awesome chance to bring in more races from the franchise, such as the Twilight or the Minish, to start. Another thing that makes it slightly weaker than Wild is that the enemies are more on the two ends of the extremes in terms of combat prowess. Oftentimes, I found myself either taking 10 hearts of damage or taking only a quarter of a heart, with very few enemies doing anything in between. In a similar vein, fusing materials onto weapons can often make them too powerful, so I avoided it where I could to avoid making the game too easy. You sort of have to adjust the difficulty yourself, a problem I did not notice in Breath of the Wild. Basically, everything in this game dies much sooner, including yourself. Like with Breath of the Wild in both the Wii U and Switch versions, Tears of the Kingdom can sometimes have frame rate issues and chug along when a lot is happening, which is the worst time for lag to be happening, when 20 Lizalfos are leaping at you simultaneously. Is it wrong for me to hold Tears to a slightly higher standard due to the passage of time? That because they had 6 more years to optimize things that it should be better than it currently is? Let me know what you think of that, as I'm pretty torn on the subject. Sometimes shrines are in caves, and the entrance to that cave can be very far away from where you know the shrine is. Better get searching the side of every wall within a mile radius. There is a way to highlight cave entrances, but you have to find that first, so you might as well just find the cave entrance itself. I'm not asking for the shrines to all be 100% out in the open, just that if it's going to be a puzzle room, it shouldn't take 30 times longer to find it than it does to solve it. These ultra-hidden shrines are rare, but frustrating nonetheless. With the game having a non-linear story, each dungeon is built with the expectation it is the first one you've come across. They have a check for when you clear all 4 of them, so it is not like they could not have set up dialogue scenarios for the player depending on the order they went. One final, small negative thing to add. Getting the champion's clothing, the default look for this version of Link, was a lot more cryptic to obtain, as opposed to in Breath of the Wild where it was along the main questline. It seems silly to me to place such a monumental piece of equipment off the beaten path like this in a way that many a player will miss it. Ultimately, of course, these are all just nitpicks that do not stop the game from being fantastic. Plus, it would be weird for me to rattle off a ton of negatives and then say 95 out of 100, so here are some positives for the game. As I said before, when you build off the greatest game of the 2010s, you are already halfway there. The game still gives you plenty of freedom seldom seen in other games. Is the obvious method too hard for you? Come up with your own madness. It is borderline impossible for a player to get stuck on a puzzle for any extended period of time, and there is a lot of fun to be had in coming up with your own unique solution, knowing what you're supposed to do, then saying, that is a valid point, but fuck you, I'm Spider-Man, and climbing up the side of something rather than walking around it. Don't have the stamina to climb it? Build a makeshift fire and ride the thermals like a red-tailed hawk. Just remember that place Zonai machines only last a minute. One thing I noticed Kingdom does better than Wild is how the developers have thought of essentially everything when it comes to NPC interactions, what time of day it is, where they are located, what you're wearing, and more. It is comparable to that Oblivion Radiant AI demo from 2005, except it actually works. It only took us 18 years to reach it, but here we are. Another cool thing that Kingdom has that Wild doesn't is the depths. If the surface world is comparable to Oblivion's Cyrodiil, the depths are the Shivering Isles. It is Alice in Wonderland gone horribly wrong, and I love it. I advise detailing the map of the depths as much as possible, though. In short, the strongest attribute the game has is that, like Wild, it hardly feels like a game at all, as it takes place in a giant living world of adventures waiting to be had, and it absolutely nails what I like to call the superhero sandbox genre of video games. There's no greater feeling than entering focus mode and landing 6 headshots in a row on a silver moblet. I said in my top 10 games of the decade video for the 2010s that maybe this branch of Zelda games could go 2 for 2 in being the best game of their respective decade, and while other games still have 6 more years to come out and beat it, that is going to be a tough order to fill. This game was made with hundreds of people and hundreds of thousands of man-hours, and if my small indie game involving rolling a ball to the goal is even 1% as good as Tears of the Kingdom is, I will consider it to be a rousing success. If you prefer Kingdom over Wild, that is perfectly fine. Frankly, it is like trying to decide whether you prefer Kirk or Picard, and will no doubt become one of the greatest debates in the video game zeitgeist. In any case, my name is Gaming Top 10, and Tears of the Kingdom is, at the time of this video, the newest entry into my list of the top 10 greatest games of all time. No matter what, a Goron's favorite type of rock will always be the ones that fall from space. They tend to be meatier.